Price, that's the number one technical indicator.
You do best by investing for the longer term.
If you can't explain what the business is doing, then that is a huge red flag.
Some technological change is going to put you out of business.
It really is a genuinely extraordinary situation.
Hello everyone, I'm your host Ed Gotham and welcome to another episode of Opto Sessions, where we interview the top traders and investors from around the world, uncovering their secrets to success. This week we've got Andrew Chanin on the show, CEO at ProcureAM. ProcureAM enables investors to access otherworldly opportunities via the Space ETF UFO. Andrew has a rich history in the equity markets, beginning his career working for Kellogg Group in 2007 as an ETF trader, followed by a move to Cohen Capital Group as a director of international trading. However, for the last 5 years, he's been fully focused on ProcureAM. In this interview, we discuss the finer details of the space industry, covering space tourism, satellites, military defense systems, and even crazy things such as asteroid mining, space hotels, and the colonisation of planets. Andrew explains how these things are not so crazy after all and may be coming sooner than you think. The Space ETF UFO is also available in Europe and the UK as YODA via HanETF. Please see the show notes for more details. Enjoy. Hi Andrew, great to have you on the show. How are you doing?
Great and thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Where are you calling from today?
I am in New York City, New York.
Well, you were just saying actually there's a bit of bad weather there at the moment, you could say.
It's right now the skies have cleared up and my building is still standing, but it's been a pretty hectic past 24 hours over here.
Yeah. And it's all gone now, is it? The storm has passed?
From my area, yes, fortunately. But there's a lot of cleanup efforts and restoration things already in the process.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're here to talk about space. The final frontier. I mean, we've not really had this on the show before, so it's great to have you guys on that we can talk through this theme that's becoming ever more popular at the moment. I thought before we dive into space fully, we could start with defining where space actually begins and, you know, where our atmosphere finishes or whatever. I think a lot of people don't even know that. So is that something you can take us through, Andrew?
Yeah, so this is a highly disputed term where Earth ends and space begins. And the definition that we use is probably one of the most widely followed opinions on the definition of where space begins. And that's something actually known as the Kármán line. Roughly 100 kilometers above Earth's surface is where we reach a point where there's not enough air to lift winged crafts. So you have to get kind of creative beyond just the typical physics that we're used to for building aircrafts. And the Kármán line is something that is viewed by many around the world as the official starting point for space.
Awesome. No, that's really good. It's good to get an idea of where that actually is. And so going back to space as an opportunity, you obviously got a lot of experience in that area. In terms of the opportunity, how big is it? And over the next few decades, obviously further into the future, it opens up probably more avenues. But in the next few decades, what's realistic in terms of the size of opportunity and what they might go into?
Yeah, so one of the most viewed publications and research pieces that comes out on a regular basis is one put out by the Space Foundation. They put out quarterly reports and other reports, but one of the biggest ones that they put out is the annual space report. So this report had just come out. They look at the previous year, and this has been something that they've been working on for years now. And it's probably one of the most sourced publications for defining the space economy. And it looks at different things like what are the technologies, what are the companies, what are the industries that are that comprise the broader space industry, and how has it grown over time? And this is looking back at 2020, the most recent numbers, which are in the 2021 report. Shows that the space industry as of the end of last year was about a $447 billion industry. And that's up about 4.4% from the previous year. Now, I'm not able to make projections myself, But what I can do is I can look at, third parties' various projections. And, one of the really interesting things about space is that investment houses are starting to give this industry significant attention. And so you have houses like Morgan Stanley that have built out space teams to focus on this industry. And they project by 2040 that the space industry will be north of $1 trillion annually. And Bank of America takes it a step even further, and they believe that by 2045, the space industry could be roughly $2.7 trillion. So, a decent disparity, and the dates are not identical. But looking at a $447 billion kind of present value of the industry as of 2020, these research houses are looking at significant potential growth across this industry in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's already big, but growing quickly as well. And I suppose there's there's not much of a cap on it, I suppose, in the sort of scope that it can scale up over time. And so, what are the key trends that are happening today that are sort of unlocking this opportunity in space? What industries are the most interesting ones that have got sort of traction?
Well, so there are certain technological advances that have really opened up the space industry for the commercialization of this industry. And so, in the early days of the space program, and various countries coming up with space initiatives, it was almost entirely government and government agency funded. And now it's roughly, a little north of 20% of space industry funding comes from governments and government agencies. So the commercialization side has picked up significantly. And one of the major reasons is because the cost of accessing space has become significantly reduced than even just a decade ago. And one of the reasons for this is the advent of reusable rockets. So the idea that you don't have to start fresh and build an entire new spacecraft every single time you want to go to space is something that lowers costs. It allows you to send things up more frequently, quicker in between launches. And it's something that's really allowing more companies to access space than ever before, because it is cheaper and faster than it has historically been. So new players are coming into space. Companies that have already been space companies are now looking at ways of expanding their capabilities. And it's something that allows for significantly more R&D for those that wish to be future space companies to be able to access. And this is a major change for the space industry. If you just look at the cost of NASA to send an astronaut to the space station, NASA used to be reliant on Russian capabilities, and it would cost north of $80 million per seat. And now with SpaceX and their reusable rockets, they're costing somewhere in the mid $40 million range per seat. So if you just think about how much budget that could free up for NASA or others looking to do similar types of missions, the cost savings is tremendous. And each, Virgin Galactic and its competitors are looking to drive that price down even further. Another thing that's really helping to expand the space industry is satellite technology. So satellites are becoming smaller, they're becoming more powerful, they're getting longer lifespans, they're able to have more functionality and programmability. And each of these things, when you think about the costs of sending things into space, you're really talking about weight and size, because you're limited to how much you could send up in a capsule. And essentially, if satellites are becoming smaller and they weigh less and they're more capable, well, it's costing less to send these satellites into outer space. And so more companies are able to now launch satellites. Governments, communications companies, and so on are able to become more space focused. So, these various technological breakthroughs are helping to expand what's possible for the space industry as we move forward.
And just on the satellites, what exactly are the industries that they support? Why are they launching satellites into space? What are they used for?
This is very important. I think that this is actually one of the most misunderstood areas of the space industry. For space, it's so difficult for some investors and individuals to understand it because it seems so far away. It's out of sight, out of mind. But really, space technology is enabling almost every industry here on Earth today. And if you take space out of the equation, many industries wouldn't function as we know it, or would completely grind to a halt. So when you look at things like even the financial industry, well, when you have a trade that is executed, there's time involved. There's a timestamp. And this timestamp is an agreed upon time definition based on the pinging of numerous satellites around the world agreeing on that set time. So even financial markets and tradings wouldn't be the same without space. And it's extremely critical today. But from a communication standpoint, most companies use communications of some sort, whether it's to talk internally, whether it's to talk to clients, whether it's to do business, search the internet. And in many cases, we're using space. But what are some of these specific industries of technological breakthrough that are becoming very reliant, that people don't understand the importance of satellites for? Well, think about cloud computing, big data and analytics, 5G, Internet of Things and connected devices, even blockchain and cryptocurrency. If you look at each of these industries, they're all extremely data-heavy industries. They're either generating data or they're sending data from point A to point B. And in many cases, satellites are an essential part of this infrastructure, and they're acting as this digital data superhighway toll operator for these companies. So, if these investors that are investing billions of dollars into those aforementioned technologies and industries, are correct, well, then we're looking at a tremendous amount of data that needs to be created and transferred. And satellites are an almost essential part in a large case for many of these industries. But beyond just data, we're using satellites for GPS and tracking. We're using satellites for imagery and Earth observation and surveillance. And we've seen wildfires spreading across the west coast of the United States and across southeastern Europe. And in many cases, we're using satellites to help us track the course of these fires, where it would almost be extremely difficult. And even with the hurricanes that we've just seen hit over the last 2 weeks here in the United States, again, satellites are incredibly important for weather monitoring and tracking. So many industries, whether you can touch it, feel it or not, satellites are helping enable so many different industries around the world today.
Yeah. It's quite an interesting time. The Starlink, I think that's what it's called, Elon Musk's satellite internet. It's just been gone into beta, I believe, and I've had a few friends that have received theirs and started using it. That's all driven by satellites, I assume.
Yes, exactly. So Starlink is one of the many emerging space communications technologies that are out there, and that's currently part of SpaceX. And one of the untold stories about satellites is that we are seeing a land grab for low Earth orbit, and many satellite technologies are reliant upon this low Earth orbit realm. And to the extent that some companies are able to get satellites up before others, you could have this kind of grandfathering in for those satellites for these companies. And in the future, if we start to see much more cluttering of low Earth orbit, it may be difficult for other companies to send up more satellites in the future. Roughly, I just saw a report that there's 8,000 or so total satellites orbiting the planet currently, and in low Earth orbit, and about 42% of those are inoperable at the moment. So we have a little over 4,000 currently in operation satellites, and that number is up significantly because a year ago we were roughly at about 3,000 satellites currently in operation in orbit. So we're seeing a significant ramp up of these satellites, and so this being able to have satellites up there currently in orbit today could potentially be a competitive advantage over future emerging competitors.
Yeah, brings to mind what might happen with the political sort of situation with so many satellites from different countries in space, but nobody owns any particular areas of space. As far as I'm aware, there's going to be a new sort of challenge up there, I suppose.
Well, there are different space doctrines and areas of space policy that cover various areas, but many of them haven't been challenged to date. So what happens when certain countries start to progress faster than others, and how how do they wish to play in the sandbox with others? And, I think another untold story about space is, government and military ambitions for space. We've certainly seen China announce many of its ambitions, such as building a permanent lunar colony by 2028 for research purposes, and potentially a permanent military colony on the moon by 2030.
Wow.
And we certainly know when it comes to military desires that these things don't happen in a vacuum. And the United States is certainly one of those countries that doesn't like to be in second place in any area of military capability. So when they see their adversaries and even allies start to spend more in different areas, in many cases, the United States has reacted by spending even more. So the space race 2.0 is here. The spending and the infrastructure builds and the technological builds are already happening. We're seeing contracts starting to pour in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because I think China's ramping up their spend in that area a lot, I believe. And even India and places are looking to go into it.
Yeah, and I think it's because countries realize that, the winners of the next decade for space could have a significant stronghold for decades to come. So it's not that they're investing just because, hey, they want to see if they can do something. They have ambitions and they want to do things with these projects.
So are we going to see space planes protecting our planet or something from outer space soon? Or is it going to go to that level? I mean, you've mentioned the base on the moon. Is that what, in terms of defense and military, are those the sort of things they're going to be going into? Protection?
One of the most important parts is protecting the assets that we have in space today. So much from communications is passed through satellites today, especially secure communications. And so to the extent that a foreign adversary could take a satellite offline or can run cyber attacks on satellites or even co-opt them or change their course and turn them into potential missiles or other things that could destroy other satellites and muddy up low Earth orbit for others. These are significant problems that need to be addressed and prepared for in advance, because waiting till after something happens is too late. So, the stakes are already high. We have spent, as a globe, we've spent tremendous amounts building out the space infrastructure and satellites today. But there are many purposes why governments are looking at space. And another China ambition is to harness solar energy in space and to beam it back down to Earth as a power source. So wow. It's not all military, but there are things that, if technologies don't work, could have tremendous impacts here on Earth. And if they do work, they could also have tremendous impacts here on Earth.
And in terms of infrastructure, so space infrastructure, what does that cover? I mean, is this sort of space stations, the vehicles or satellite shuttles even that are and rockets that are bringing things into space? Are these the sort of infrastructure things we're talking about?
Yeah, space stations, permanent colonies, satellites for communication purposes. It's great to get up to space, but you also need to be able to communicate once you're up there. So there's a lot that needs to be built out for humanity to expand into the cosmos. But kind of another area of that is it's not just having these permanent or long-lasting structures in space. We've seen that the International Space Station is something that is probably going to be out of commission by the end of this decade, with our Russian partners leaving, call it in the next 4 years or so. China has already started building what would be one of the largest operating space stations ever, and they're making significant progress on that today already. But you need robotics and you need other things to build in space. So for humans to explore the cosmos, humans need shelter, they need air, they need food, they need water, and these are basic things that humans need to survive. But what if you can build the robotics and the capabilities to actually build those lunar colonies before humans ever step foot on these stations or colonies on the moon, Mars, and beyond? We can build, in theory, hopefully, everything that we need for humans to be able to then go and live there permanently. So, robotics are another area that are very important for space that can help us expand well beyond, kind of our human comfort zone.
And what about space tourism with the likes of Bezos, Musk, and Richard Branson as well, sort of the billionaires going head to head in a contest to sort of win in that area. How's that going? Where do you see that going over the next few decades? Obviously, there's been quite a lot of movement over the last couple of years in that area.
Yeah, this is an exciting area. And, when the S Network Space Index was first created, space tourism didn't really have a place in it. It wasn't really an industry. And with the recent launches this summer, both by Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, the space tourism industry is now also open for business. So we are in the very early days. We need to see more customers go to space and return safely to get an understanding of which one of these experiences is better. For the most part, the current passengers, with the exception of the individual that had the highest bid for the Blue Origin flight, many of these are kind of internal people that are getting free rides or rides on the company's dime. Let's see what happens when people start spending hundreds of thousands to millions of their own dollars, and we need to find out what those experiences are. But over the next several years, we're looking at flights beyond, or tourism beyond just sub low Earth orbit and just past the Kármán line. We've already heard of companies that are looking to build orbiting hotels by 2028. And yes, that's probably a very ambitious timeline, but these are things that companies are working on today. So it might be beyond just, hey, let's go up to space, have a couple minutes of near zero gravity weightlessness. What about if you could actually spend several days orbiting the Earth on a space station? Now that sounds like a completely differentiated type of experience. And from various analysts that we've seen, they predict that that the space tourism industry by the end of this decade will be somewhere roughly $3 to $4 billion annually. Wow. So still very small when looking at the broader industry. But when it's all considered, this is coming from $0, basically a year ago. So it's phenomenal to see these new emerging space industries actually entering the fray and creating hopefully sustainable entities in space tourism.
Yeah, you can definitely see how that would be popular. I mean, it's a very interesting concept, isn't it? And I assume that as time goes on, those costs keep on going down, so that it becomes more of a mass market thing, I imagine, maybe a lot further into the future.
Yeah, Richard Branson has personally said that he would love to get the costs down for Virgin Galactic passengers down to closer to $40,000 per ticket. And yes, that's still very expensive, and would price out many people. But for those that are really looking to get this experience, that could be a much larger total addressable market if you're able to drive the cost significantly lower than where they are today.
Mm-hmm. And out of these industries, not just the ones we've covered now, but any that are sort of relevant for the next couple of decades, from your perspective, what do you think, or which one do you think has the most potential?
So I can't really do rankings or projections on that, but really, communications is one of these really important industries that most people, they may have exposure to communications companies and whatnot, but satellite companies are extremely important for global communications, whether it's secure communications, whether it's communications in hard to reach areas. We were talking earlier about the Morgan Stanley estimates and the Bank of America. And if you look at the numbers that they're using to calculate, what the future size of the industry will be, they believe that a significant driver comes from broadband internet and communications. So that is an area that it's tough to overlook when trying to invest in space, because the communication side of the space industry already is roughly over 30% of the overall space economy comes from these players. And the belief of many analysts out there is that this is to be one of those growing industries to help prop up the broader space industry. But I'm certainly excited to see what kind of technologies we'll be able to develop over the years, whether it's resource extraction like harvesting asteroids. Right now it's there's not a huge need because we still have plenty of resources here on Earth to keep us moving forward. But as populations grow, or as we look to expand into the cosmos, it's really expensive to send Earth resources to outer space. So to the extent that you can harvest resources, whether it's lunar ice or whether it's valuable commodities on Mars that we can use to build out the colonization efforts for these planets and launch pads. But to the extent that you can find them in space, you can have those resources significantly faster and cheaper than sending them from Earth. And then other enabling technologies like robotics and 3D printing and drones and whatnot that allow for the autonomous development of these and remote development for these colonies and infrastructure projects. That could be another area of interest for the broader space industry in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen articles about that and looks very, very interesting. Just coming back to the broadband or internet, just I had a question about it because to understand a bit more about why we need the satellites to send the data around. Because I assume today a lot of that isn't done by satellite, it travels by like wires underneath the ocean and stuff. Is that right? And then I can only assume that maybe we're maxing out the capacity of them and it means we need to use satellite more? Or do you have more details on that?
Yeah, so in many cases, when dealing with short distance communications, we are utilizing fiber optics or other types of lines that are laid underground or other types of communications. But for long distance transmissions and communications, for a lot of streaming efforts, it's a tremendous amount of it is actually being assisted at some point by satellites.
Okay.
There was even something that came out just a couple of days ago that Apple is looking to have an upgrade for their upcoming cell phones that might be using satellites to help in the process for communications in hard to reach areas. So. Yeah. Especially when you look at developing nations and areas that haven't necessarily had the tremendous infrastructure build out that we have in some of the more developed world, it's almost easier for them to use satellites as opposed to having to build out the tremendous amount of infrastructure, especially if you have population spread out across wide areas. Satellites become even more important in those situations. So to the extent that we can continue to improve on satellite technology and reduce latency, satellites are incredibly important, especially for government and top secret military operations. Satellite radio is preferred.
Yeah, it really is amazing how you can send something up to a satellite and then it comes back down and delivered to us.
This interview today wouldn't be happening without satellite technology. Yeah. So thank you to all the incredible engineers working around the world to make sure that we could be connected, especially in this, during these pandemic times when, many people have been forced to work remotely. The redundancy and capabilities of satellites have really helped smooth this transition for many companies and individuals around the world.
We hope you're enjoying the episode. For interviews like this every Thursday, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, make sure you give us a star rating and leave guest suggestions along with any other feedback in the review section. Now, back to the show.
And just going back to the future of space, outward of the next decades, we talked about resource extraction, asteroid mining, etc. What other areas are there that, obviously there's robotics, etc., but what other areas are there past this next couple of decades? Are we talking about things such as colonization? Are those the next things that we're looking at?
Yeah, and we're even working on that this decade. So, some of these projects, they're probably further out, like, mining asteroids. But if we're going to be sending permanent colonies to the moon, we're going to need to utilize resources there on the moon, whether it's lunar ice or other types of elements that we can find in slightly below the surface. These are all things that we'll want to utilize when building out these permanent colonies. But this area of kind of the militarization of space is something that we cannot sleep on, and it's something that we're already seeing these contracts being granted to companies that are going to be able to help governments and their militaries expand into space. And it's not just the US and China, it's across Europe, it's India, it's the Middle East, it's Russia, it's Japan, and so on. And so this is, a truly global collaborative effort, but we're also seeing, countries trying to do what they can to stake dominance in space. But, if we're going to be sending all of these crafts and people and technology into outer space, there becomes the potential issue of clutter in, like we mentioned, in low Earth orbit and space debris, which could be extremely harmful if not, regulated and tracked and avoided. And so another area of importance will need to be space debris removal. And there are many companies working on different types of solutions, whether it's taking things out of orbit and decommissioning them and having them burn up or sent back to Earth without harming individuals or infrastructure here on Earth, whether it's going to satellites and helping increase the lifespan of them by improving the technology or repairing them, whether it's more money spent on tracking debris. But the more things that you send into orbit, the more potential clutter, and clutter can breed chaos. And so the ability to remove this debris and to make low Earth orbit a usable realm for various satellite technologies is extremely important. And cleaning up space and protecting the assets that we have up there could be an extremely critical industry in the future.
Amazing. Thanks, Andrew. We've also got Andre on the show to just talk about the ETF UFO.
Yes. Hi, Ed. Good to be with you. Thank you.
So can you take us through UFO and the areas of focus, a few examples of the holdings?
Yeah, sure. So I think the methodology behind it has basically been covered by Andrew. So we at HanETF, we are a white label platform, and the idea behind what we do is that we want to partner with specialists who are leaders in their space, who know what they do, and realize new investment strategies with them and bring them to market as ETFs. And that's exactly what we did here. Andrew and his team, they brought this, the knowledge of this ETF to market, and the methodology has been designed by them. There was no definition in the traditional ETF world, which, as you may know, relies on index providers coming up with a way to measure certain investment themes and make them investable. To begin that, you need a universe of stocks. Now, that's obviously available. You have a globally listed universe of stocks. But then to say which of these stocks actually are relevant and constitute space and generate relevant revenues, that's really the added value here. That's where Procure and Andrew's company come into play together with S Network. They obviously designed that index a while ago. As he probably said, the only recognized space index by the Space Foundation, which is a great accolade. So we rely on that basically, and try to include companies from all the sectors that he named. I mean, it's mostly communications. So we rely satellite operators, satellite builders, people who build the hardware like the rockets themselves, the launch gear, and all these things. So these are the core components that go into it. What's also important is that we try to be, as pure play as possible. So we have certain minimum requirements in terms of revenue that these companies need to generate from space in order to be eligible. And it's also probably important to stress that they need to generate extra revenues, because sometimes in these new themes that come up in the market, depends on how you measure them, they are very young companies, and you see them now coming to markets and they don't generate revenues yet. So we also take care that the company is already at a viable stage where they have a product that's ready and generate some revenues, because as exciting as the space is, and as many exciting ideas as we see come to markets, for investment purpose, we obviously want to make sure that there's a certain validity to it. So that's what we do. How we build that index and ETF itself. Some of the companies in the ETF, if anyone's interested, we got 35 companies at the moment in ETF. They are actually publicly available. You can go on our website, HanETF.com, and find the full list of holdings with the weightings on a daily basis. We have companies in there like Virgin Galactic for example. They are part of it, one of the better known. There's a company like Lockheed Martin, a bit more traditional ones if you want. Garmin, also a name that some people know. Airbus, for example, but also more, companies that you might not have heard of so much, Orcom or certain satellite operators or producers of satellites, which might not be mainstream knowledge, but who will greatly benefit from the rise of the space industry.
Great. Well, thanks, Andre. Could you just tell us for US and European audiences how they can access the ETF? What ticker should they look for, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. So, our ETF now specifically has been built for a European audience. I believe there's a sister or brother ETF in the US, but ours is a so-called UCITS ETF, which European investors across European countries, including the UK, even though we left Europe, they're still allowed to invest. They can access it normally if you're a private investor through your broker. So the ETF has been passported for public distribution, as we say, in most countries of Central Western Europe. So if you log into your broker and just search with the ISIN of the product or the ticker, you should be able to find it. You find those metrics also on our webpage or the fact sheet, which you can download there. The ticker, for simplicity, is YODA. I think everyone can very easily memorize that. A little Star Wars analogy here. Very nice ticker, easy to memorize. YODA, type it in, you'll find the ETF. It's listed, for those who want to have a bit more details, it's listed on the LSE, the London Stock Exchange, the Deutsche Börse in Frankfurt, and also the Borsa Italiana in Italy. The European market is a little bit more fragmented than the US one, so you need to make sure to cater to different nationalities. You can trade it in euros, in sterling, also in US dollar. So you have all this currency. We are hopeful that we can also maybe list it in Switzerland for our Swiss friends and investors to have a Swiss franc version. So yeah, it's really
brilliant. Well, thanks, Andre. So UFO in USA and YODA in Europe, UK. It's great to have you on the show, guys, and it's been really interesting to dig into space. So thanks for your time.
Thank you to you and your audience.
Thank you, Ed. Good to be there. Take care.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Just a quick note before we sign off. If you're looking for an easily digestible daily update on the markets, this might be of interest. Opto Updates is our short newsletter sent every day during the trading week, giving you a bulleted list of the top 7 stories from the global stock markets. We've done the hard work for you, highlighting relevant opportunities and trends. And in addition, we'll also keep you notified of any new products, stock reports, or webinars from the Opto world. If you're interested, sign up using the link in the show notes. And thanks also to CoFruition for consulting on and producing the show. Until next time.
CoFruition.